Liverpool have had an outstanding start to the season, but one minor disappointment in Arne Slot's team has of course been Florian Wirtz. And today I wanted to take a minute to explain why he's perhaps played better than some would think, how his role has changed from Leverkusen to Liverpool, but perhaps more importantly, why he's still being held back from showing his full potential in Arne Slot's side so far this season. First and foremost, Florian Wirtz's playmaking stats aren't actually that bad when we compare him to what he was doing at Leverkusen last season and what he's doing for the Anfield club in the Premier League this time around. For example, his passes into the penalty area have dropped from 2.49 down to 1.25, which is obviously half of what we saw last season. However, what's perhaps more interesting is that when we take a look at his passes into the final third this season, they've actually risen from 3.68 to 4.0 per 90. And perhaps surprisingly to some, his key passes, which is a pass that leads to a shot, have actually risen from last season in the Bundesliga, which were 2.18 to 2.25 in the Premier League this time around. So in a sense, Wirtz is probably playing a little further back in the pitch. He's perhaps doing that initial pass that leads to a shot rather than the guy in and around the box who's setting up goals in a very real and immediate sense. However, when we take a look at Wirtz's expected assists, which are perhaps a better gauge of that pass that we just mentioned that leads to a teammate taking a shot, it's dropped from 0.36 last season down to 0.17. So I think what we're maybe seeing here is Wirtz playing a more reserved role, maybe further back in the pitch. He's certainly laying off passes to teammates who do take shots, which is obviously quite common in that Liverpool team. But on the whole, he's probably playing the initial pass in a play rather than being the guy in and around the box to play that killer through ball. This then brings us on to Wirtz's new role for Liverpool and why it has been different from what he did at Leverkusen last season. First thing we absolutely have to talk about is the player's incredible ability to dribble by players and why we're just not seeing that at Anfield this season. Last season in the Bundesliga for Leverkusen, Wirtz made almost 4 times more successful dribbles than any other player in Xabi Alonso's team. However, in the Premier League this season for Liverpool, he's actually 4th behind Ekitike, Cody Gakpo and Ryan Gravenberch. When we then focus in on his dribbles into the penalty area specifically, so far more direct actions in these games, we can see that he actually almost had twice as many as any other Leverkusen player in the Bundesliga last season. But again, for Liverpool, that's a notable drop-off, and he actually falls behind both Gakpo and Salah in the Premier League so far this season. And perhaps the most obvious way of depicting Wirtz's change in role between these two teams is to see where he touches the ball on the pitch. Now, Wirtz's touches per game have dropped significantly this season compared to last season, but when we narrow in on where those changes have been, we can see a real significant difference in how he's been played from one manager to the next. As we can see here, his touches in the middle third have dropped by 18%, but perhaps more notably, his touches of the ball in the final third and the penalty area have actually dropped by an even more significant 34%, while his touches in the defensive third have actually risen ever so slightly. So as we can see, Wirtz is playing a more reserved role in that Liverpool midfield, and that's a real problem when we then take a look at his goal scoring record for Liverpool and compare it to what he did at Leverkusen last season. Now, it goes without saying that Wirtz was obviously not going to walk straight into Liverpool's team and almost overnight become their new talisman, become their new Salah, become their new main goal scorer. Liverpool already have world-class players who are experts at pulling the trigger in the final third. Salah's a perfect example of that, but they had other players like Cody Gakpo, and they've signed excellent strikers in Hugo Ekitike and Alexander Isak this summer. That, more than anything else, undoubtedly explains why Wirtz's shots per 90 have dropped by 39%. And really worryingly, his shots on target per 90 in the Premier League this season is 63% less than what he achieved in the Bundesliga for Leverkusen. Much like his dribbling stats in the Bundesliga last season, Wirtz was a clear outlier in that Leverkusen team when it came to taking shots. He finished top of the squad for total shots on target and total shots in general in that Leverkusen team. But so far this season, he's only managed as many shots and shots on target as defensive midfielder Ryan Gravenberch. And this is really the crux of the issue that Wirtz is facing at Liverpool right now. He's perfectly talented enough to be an excellent midfielder that can pull the strings, dictate play, and make good passes around the pitch, as well as Alexis McAllister, Ryan Gravenberch, or Dominic Szoboszlai. But so far, Wirtz hasn't had an opportunity to showcase his goal-scoring ability at his new club. And unless Arne Slot can find a way to fit him into his tactics and get him into these goal-scoring opportunities that the likes of Salah, Ekitike, Alexander Isak and Gakpo currently occupy, then he'll only be able to show a portion of his full potential for his new club.